Mimno Gigijeb. Bonjour Dinaway Magnadok. Onin. Joyum Dijnakaz. Nipissing and Dojaba. Good morning. And hello, all of my relatives. I am Joey from Nipissing. I felt called this morning to put this video together. In past times, recent past times, I've been faced with a couple questions regarding my stance against a lot of what we're doing on, well, this even ties into it, what I consider this, the so-called work in the front lines. I was questioned yesterday. I run into somebody that I'm quite familiar with, a very devout activist who questioned a lot of my rhetoric around a lot of the actions that have taken place, in particular, perhaps standing against the old growth, a big action that we all knew of that I was quite heavily involved with Fairy Creek. The significance of the question had to do with just basically that. And I was questioned, as we all know, quite often we use this word so-called when it's something we know not to necessarily be true. So quite often you hear us say so-called Canada. We don't acknowledge Canada as to be legitimate, so we call it so-called. And quite often you'll hear me say so-called land defenders, so-called this, and I say that, and most people don't really pick up onto it. However, I notice the ones that actually are kind of on the ball, they pick up on these things. And I have been quite vocal in a lot of my wording and a lot of my stance against, like I say, so-called land defense. And the reason I say that is because, as mentioned, and as most know, I am quite heavily involved in land defense, have been quite involved. And I am now using terms like so-called land defense. And it is just that. I use it for the same reasons, and I explained this yesterday, and I'm going to offer these words to y'all here today on this video. I use this term when something is actually not accurate. And how I learn this is through becoming wise to it through my own actions. I myself am guilty of the things in which I'm speaking out against, but I've learned from them, and I feel that I move forward from them. And this is why I have a different stance than many others. Perhaps many others have just not yet learned from them. But this person asked me yesterday, why do you call it so-called land defenders? That seems very disrespectful. So I outlined it. And the reason I offered these words is not a direct poke at anybody. What I've done is I've evaluated my own responsibilities and my own actions, and I come to these conclusions. In the colonial world, essentially what we call it is science. To me, a land defender is somebody who cares greatly for our mother and would do anything in their power to ensure her safety, to ensure her longevity, to ensure her health, and all of these common things we're all aware of. Now, to me, being Anishinaabe, we are to live under the great law and under the guidance of we're to live for the next 7 generations. We hear that very often. So for the same reason I say so-called Canada's, because I don't acknowledge Canada, I don't acknowledge many of us so-called land defenders as land defenders. I don't think going out and fighting against industry or fighting the police is defending. It seems to me that if we were going to call it that, we would call it land losers, because very few of these battles we've defended. We've actually lost most of them. But on another note, to me, the main focus of land defense is to protect our mother. And what I did is, like I said, I evaluated and looked at my own responsibilities and my behavior. And I started calculating and taking into account, am I coming out at a positive or a negative carbon footprint? Is what I'm doing going to make our earth better, our great mother better, or be in as good a condition for the next 7 generations? Immediately when I got into land defense, one of the first actions that I was arrested at was one of the first rallies. I think it was actually the very first rally against Trans Mountain expansion with Coast Protectors. And I went to this rally, and there were some very influential so-called land and water defenders. And I'm going to continue to call many, many, many of you activists so-called land and water defenders. And it's going to sting a little bit, but the truth always does. It took me to swallow this sour medicine pill to understand that we're not land and water defenders. So when I went to this Trans Mountain expansion protest, we're protesting or standing against. I myself don't protest. I uphold my responsibilities. So I was just there to uphold my responsibility to our mother, I felt. And these are terms that we use. But upon getting to the front line, we're there to stand against an oil pipeline pumping bitumen across the beautiful and sacred land of many, many nations, and wants to twin this pipeline to our sacred Salish Sea to be pumped out. And we stood against that, and we all stood together in so-called solidarity with our mother. And upon getting to this rally, I couldn't help but notice that every single person, well, I shouldn't say that, that's a very big blanket, and that's where I get into trouble sometimes. I do things on a majority. When I say everybody, it's kind of a majority. The majority of the people there were drinking out of water bottles, eating out of candy wrappers, granola bars coming out of everywhere, single-use plastic like I've never seen before. One of the number one things that completely, in my opinion, voids you of any care for the earth is banners. It's one of the most toxic fabrics generally a petroleum-based ink. And it's just excess for absolutely no reason. You don't need to send a sign to send a message. Your presence is given up. But anyhow, nonetheless, what ended up, I kind of, right off the bat, I was like, well, I can't understand this. We were here standing against this expansion of a pipeline, petroleum pipeline, that pumps essentially what is pumping is plastic, but yet we're the number one contributors, number one customers of what's coming out the end of that pipeline. So right then and there, I was kind of skeptical of this whole West Coast activist, so-called activist thing. I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. Like, so, so then I became more heavily involved, and I myself, I don't have much in common. My former life and what my life is today are two different lives altogether. I got into this lifestyle, and I'm basically saying it right there. A lifestyle is what it is. I got into this manner of living, I should say, because I cared about the earth, and I seen the path in which I was on was very destructive and it was harming, and I wanted to get in with helping our mother. So then I became heavily involved in other actions. I got involved with a lot of solidarity with Wet'suwet'en. Um, I got into a lot of actions pertaining to Fairy Creek, stopping the old growth, many other things. And I started to notice the same common trend that we're calling ourselves land defenders, and we're using a lot of pan-indigenous things. I didn't know they were pan-indigenous at the time, but as I said, I differ from many that are out there. I actually myself am out there not because of a lifestyle, not because I have lots in common and I want to fit in with a trend. I'm actually quite solo when I'm on the front lines because I don't have much in common with many of the people. But I'm out there for the love of the earth. So to me, if I'm going to go stand against a pipeline, I'm not going to purchase something that just ran through that pipeline and bring it there to my advantage and use it. That is, to me, absolutely ludicrous. What I started really becoming cognizant of wait a minute, essentially, is, as many know, I quit my job a couple of years ago and moved to the front lines of Fairy Creek. And it was also an environmental initiative. And I became quite vocal on that front line with these so-called land defenders because our carbon footprint was astronomical. Absolutely deficit. There's no if, ands, or buts. The Fairy Creek blockade, if you are worried about, concerned about carbon, of your sole purpose for going to these front lines is to bring awareness to the dangers we're causing Mother Earth through CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas and pollution and destruction, well, it made absolutely no sense because the truth of it is just even if the blockade was successful, our carbon footprint, if you live for the next 7 generations, we came out at a deficit. We actually did, Fairy Creek blockade did more harm to our mother in the grand scheme of things through plastic, through pollution, through so many things, not even talking about the cultural appropriations. I'm just talking solely about Earth today. That I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense to me. Like, we're calling ourselves land and water defenders, but the truth of it is, we're actually causing, myself and the crowd in which I'm with, is actually causing more harm to our mother over the span of 7 generations, and that's actually what we're supposed to opposite be doing. So, this posed a problem to myself, and I started becoming outspoken about it. I started to explain, listen, we're colonizing to achieve our own initiatives. And a good example of how I can explain this, and it's where it hit me, is being on the traditional territory of the Pachita people, I was on a so-called front line with hundreds of people, if not thousands of people. And this still bugs me today. And a lot of people can make assumptions and or accusations about my feelings about this, but to me what a colonizer is somebody that enters another person's nation uninvited, takes over, tells you what you're doing is wrong, does not allow you to make choices for yourself. So they make the choices for you by force and by sheer numbers of people. And it's an eye-opening thing, and I think it's happening on many territories, but I got firsthand taste of it when I was on Pachita territory with the majority of that nation. And when I say majority, I'm not talking 51% maybe. I'm talking 95+% of the body of that nation politely asked through ceremony if we would exit that territory. And we told them what they were doing with their territory was wrong. That to me is colonization, because we didn't leave. We told them what they were doing was wrong. And not only did we not exit, we become, and we still do today, belligerent towards those people that wanted us off that territory. We have settler people on a traditional territory. We have people like me, an indigenous person from another territory, on somebody else's territory, belittling their chief and council because of his position. Very few people have ever met the man. But here we have non-indigenous to that land. If you're Anishinaabe, you're not indigenous to the Pachita territory. You are indigenous to Turtle Island, but you're not indigenous to that land. Therefore, you don't really have the right to make a statement about that land. That's what colonization is. It is for these reasons that I've started to say so-called, because what I've learned through my own experience is lived experience is we're not actually defending the land in many cases. What we are doing is becoming part of a trend. We have a situation where we want to be known as land defenders, but we don't actually want to act as land defenders. It's become a very self-serving thing, and I understand that. A lot of that is trauma response. A lot of that is actually a mental illness, and I understand it. very well, for like I say, I've lived experience. But if you're going to do something to stand for the earth, and it causes further harm to the earth than your initiative, how does it make any sense? In recent times, I've heard of people bringing trees out to the Pachidot territory and planting them. And for that, I am grateful. Thank you for planting trees. But once again, we must question and be honest and truthful with ourselves in these times. I've seen many, many photos, many videos of look at what we're doing, look at what we're doing, look at what we're doing. And to me, somebody that cares about the earth and is doing it from their heart would not be out there showing what they're doing. Now, in showing what they're doing, somebody like myself that's a very critical thinker, somebody that actually really truly cares for our great mother, and somebody that's been under this manipulation and mental illness of ego and wanting fame, per se, attention, a pat on the back. I look at this and I say, wait a minute, you've got people coming from Vancouver to plant some trees in the traditional territory of the Pachidot people. Now, what one could do is, no matter where we are on Turtle Island, there's forests nearby. Forests in need. And you could take those trees and you could go anywhere into an area and you could plant those trees quietly, maybe 100 here, 100 there, a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there. It's possible. I know this through lived experience. You make it a weekly thing, sometimes a daily thing. Do a couple trees a day, whatever. But I'm the type of person, and this is why I say so-called, because I feel it's a guise. We're wanting credit for saving our mother and doing this work, so-called work, when people come from other nations. In this case, let's say plant some trees on the Pachidot territory. You have people coming from Vancouver. They have to take a ferry. Many people probably are not aware, but I will make you aware. That ferry that comes across there burns, depending on which boat it is, but a lot of the times it's the sea, burns close to 9,000 liters of fuel on a round trip. Carries 1,500 people. As we all know, unless it's a long weekend, that ferry's very rarely at capacity. The truth of it is, if you're taking an early morning ferry, there's very few people on that ferry. So right off the bat, at 1,500, if that boat was completely loaded, you've got about, I did the math on it, you're looking at about 7 liters of fuel per person if that boat's completely full. So you have to assume that greenhouse gas, we all know that there's about 5 pounds of CO2, if not actually a little bit more for diesel, per every liter of fuel you burn. So if that boat's half full, which I doubt it even is, very rarely is it, you're burning 12, you got 12 liters. So right off the bat, that's provided you walked to the ferry, you got about a 20-25 liter greenhouse gas emission. Then you get the other side of the water and you've got a 3-hour trip. You got to go buy about 40 more liters of gas to get all the way out there and back. So now you're up to 60 liters per person. A full-grown tree in its lifetime I think will suck up a couple thousand pounds. To come all the way from Vancouver, by the time you pay for your fuel, the money that you have to destroy the earth to get the money to pay for the fuel, all your gas, all your food, generally speaking, you're going to take a bunch of plastic water bottles, plastic wrapped containers, single-use plastic for food. Probably going to stop for some fast food. Time your day's said and done, you're patting yourself on the back for harming our mother. It makes no sense. So what I've started doing is speaking out against how we're disrespecting our own traditional values of living for the next 7 generations. We cannot claim to be a land and water defender while actively partaking in colonization that's destroying the land. I can't help but make sense, or I can't help but be confused and cannot understand why we're standing in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people, why we're against CGL, why we're standing in solidarity against the Trans Mountain expansion, but we frivolously daily don't seem to mind taking advantage of the almost 1 million kilometers of pipeline in this continent. Why, and I'm not saying it isn't, why is the Yinta the Wet'suwet'en, why is it so important to protect? But meanwhile, the people protecting it are going hella wild, purchasing all of the things out of the 970,000 plus kilometers of pipeline that's already through other nations. Many nations don't want a pipeline through their territory. Like I said, there's like 970,000 kilometers of pipe in the ground from here to Texas. Why is it okay for us to go purchase a water bottle from Gas and Oil that went through the Lakota territory or through the Cree territory? And we take that water bottle and we go stand on the Wet'suwet'en territory, standing against a pipeline. Is that not a great disrespect, not only to our mother, but to our other nations? It doesn't make sense to me. I kind of see through the bullshit of it all, I feel. I feel that many of our actions have nothing to do with land and water defense. They have to do with ego and our need for acceptance, our need for fame, all of these things. Because if we really, really, really cared about pipelines crossing traditional territories, why would we ever purchase a piece of plastic and take it to a traditional territory to fight a pipeline? Because what you're essentially doing is saying, we don't care that this plastic's going across your territory, but we don't want it to go across our territory. And that's where I can't make sense of it. And like I said, I speak truths. And what I noticed, and what I can't help, and this ties into it, why is CGL and Trans Mountain so important? Out of all of the pipelines, I can't understand it. If gas and oil was really, really, really what we're against, a very simple way to shut down these pipelines easily would be, well, let's just start shutting down the air. At any given time, what is there, 7,000 planes in the air at all times, burning way more fuel, like just, it is insane. So really, truly, if we cared about the earth and we wanted to shut shit down, why are we focused on a couple families in Wet'suwet'en, in Secwepemc, Ulu, Squamish, to Tsleil-Waututh? What I've kind of noticed is Standing Rock created, it seems to me, almost a trend. And we can't deny the fact that many impoverished people have become quite well-to-do financially over these front lines. We talk about destruction to the land, but we don't accept our own responsibility. The amount of plastic we're bringing into these traditional territories and calling ourselves land defenders is just absolutely incorrect. So these are the reasons and why I've been saying so-called, because to me it is fake. It's not even to me. The facts are there. One cannot hide from your carbon footprint. One has to shoulder responsibility for everything you make, every liter of gasoline you purchase, every bit of hydro you use. All of these things. We cannot claim land defenders when we ourselves are partaking in colonization. That's just the facts, my friends. I'm going to wrap that up. I ranted long enough, but that is my reasoning. And perhaps people want to share this video, get it out. These are the reasons in which I'm not against land defense. I'm grateful for anybody that partakes in it, but the truth of it is, I'm against something that does not benefit our great mother for the next 7 generations. And a lot of what we're doing is not. So that's why I speak out against it. Apajigo Miigwech, Bisandoyeg. Thank you very much for listening. Bamapi, till we speak again.